Good evening. Hello, everyone. I welcome you all with a lot of love to this evening's special crypto class. Hi, Adi, and hi, Purdy. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. As you know, from time to time, we usually do a Q&A session or a report like this. And in the recent period, on one hand, the questions you send to customer support, I always review them. And if I see that something is being repeated multiple times by different people, then I usually highlight those separately because clearly this is something that affects many people, so we should definitely talk about them. And that is precisely why, since there are a bunch that have arrived this way, and it was clear that there is a lot of interest regarding certain topics, and there were also emails that arrived from which it is absolutely clear that the information went wrong there. And in such cases, I believe that we didn't do an accurate job if that info didn't get across to you, so we have pulled those out as well. Besides that, there are times when you send us things that one of your partners has sent to you. Now, in those, you can really see the chaos sometimes. Pardon the expression. So Petey, Attila, and I decided that we would dedicate this evening to going through every single point of the entire Mosaic Galaxy ecosystem. So we would go through the Mosaic blockchain. In this regard, of course, we would also touch upon the Asset Hub. We'll go through everything. We'll talk about Mosaic Alpha. We'll talk about the Trust Network. We'll talk about Mosaic OS, our mobile app, Timothy Chat, which is our new AI app, and of course the Mosaic Launchpad as well. So we're going to go through these nicely, step by step. Also, I indicated to you that if there are any questions related to these, please send them in, and we've included those as well. I've laid these out nicely, one under the other, and then when the guys are finished, we will, of course, go through these. Although I think there are some questions that you will naturally get answers to in the report as well. So if anyone has a question, then write it here, but I can't promise, since, as you can see, the range of topics we want to go through tonight is quite broad, that we'll be able to include those in the answers for tonight. But I trust that you will indeed get answers to everything. And what you might write down is also good for another reason, because if by chance we don't answer it, I'll still have it, and then we will make up for it. Of course, if nothing else, then I will talk about it myself on the Monday call. So I won't drag this out. I'll just hand the floor over to you guys, and then whenever I'm needed, because I know there are things where I'll be needed anyway, then, well, naturally, I'll be right here.
Sudi, you're always needed.
Well,
Hey everyone. No, seriously, really. So that sounded funny, but I meant it seriously. Yes, so for a short little introduction, we're going to cover a lot of topics because we want to give a complete picture. And we tried, and ultimately Suti's suggestion was the best one for how we should group the questions and the topics. Because, by the way, everything is connected to everything else, so we will keep referring back to things, and we'll let you know that we'll talk about that later. But in the end, we decided to start with the mosaic chain stuff. And maybe this is something I didn't look at, so I don't know the exact question statistics, but it's certain that many of you asked when the projects are expected on the chain and when they will launch. We've talked a lot about how we're negotiating with these kinds of people, negotiating with those kinds of people. We generally avoided mentioning names, and this really has significance, especially with these kinds of larger companies and in the corporate sector. For one thing, it's not the custom there, and it doesn't look good if, let's say, a collaboration like this is published in Telegram posts. On the other hand, when we bring up that we need to communicate about this, there's a very long, complicated agreement and set of conditions involved. However, once it's working and it's on the chain, then, it's not secret. There's no need to keep it a secret. So in reality, it's in everyone's best interest, and it's good for everyone if these types of communications don't get started. and as we've said many times before, what the experiences were. But still, we should say something. So in the short term, in the near future, what can get started? Anyone who is involved in shipping, freight, or logistics in any way has likely heard that there is a new European Union regulation that has enabled a lot of useful things. And building on that, a verification service is launching, from which a significant volume of transactions will come. I don't want to go into that here, but maybe PD is braver about giving exact details. This is definitely going to launch this year. So can you confirm that, PD?
I can confirm that. Without a doubt.
Yes, and besides that, with the Mosaic Trust Network, several large enterprise solutions are also in the testing and preparation phase. The service could probably, well, technically it could launch earlier. But it's not just technical issues in these situations. Even there, you could say that there will be a launch this year, but it's likely that it will only be towards the end of the year. Uh, we'll talk a bit later about the MTR, where things stand with that, what's ready, what could technically launch immediately, what the situation is. A question came up. The reason I'm skipping ahead is because we'll talk about the MTR later, about whether Sentinel will send notifications regarding the votes. The answer to that is yes, it will, but that will happen once the governance is released. So once we've handed over governance to the validator community, it won't before that, because the whole Sentinel is built on on-chain data. And, while a part of it is on-chain right now, because no one else could vote and it can't be bypassed, only those who are validators. I won't go into the technology. This isn't the same governance that, this voting one, this democracy interface, it's not the same as what the governance will be, and that's what Sentinel is built on. Then, of course, questions came up regarding Mosaic Coin, so Moss about what to expect. This is something where it would be irresponsible to say anything, especially in the short term. If you watch the market, you can see it, especially if you follow a project closely and see what's happening there. It's also clear that very often there is no correlation between how a project performs and its short-term price movements. However, one thing must be acknowledged. There is no project whose price doesn't experience crashes. So if something like that happens, it's inevitable that it will happen. If that happens, it's a natural process. And, there's a part of this that depends on us, meaning it depends on the Mosaic team. If we imagine a big pie, in terms of what influences the prices, there is a slice that actually depends on you too. And I'll explain more about that in a moment. And there's a big, big slice that absolutely doesn't depend on us, where a speculator or some generally not necessarily well-intentioned actor can take advantage of projects, can take advantage of price movements. They have a lot of experience in how to pull this off profitably. It's inevitable that we'll run into things like this. This usually doesn't mean anything in the long run, though in the short term, it can obviously cause some annoyance. What can be done otherwise? What can we contribute to this? So here, both on your part and on ours, what we can do. It depends most on us, and this is what we are starting with great enthusiasm in a new system here. How we communicate. This is a very important thing. Perhaps most of what can be done depends on this. But right after that, the next thing is how the community reacts. So when we really look at what can greatly influence this entire situation, it is fundamentally about how the community collectively handles a specific piece of information, breaking news, or perhaps a complex social phenomenon as it unfolds in real time. Because these, I wouldn't necessarily call them speculators. They actually operate more like hyenas. These aren't necessarily evil people. They simply approach it like a math problem. They know that this has the psychology to it, and they know how to trigger a process like this. Typically, actors appear on social media platforms. These could be well-trained robots by now, but usually they are real people. They blow some piece of information out of proportion, create hysteria, and then reinforce it with a larger sell-off. They usually do this by making small, invisible purchases over weeks or months, starting a negative communication campaign, and then suddenly dumping everything they've bought onto the market. A portion of the community usually gets scared by this. The question here is, well, there are always people who get scared. The question is whether 3% get scared or 70%. Their goal is for as many people as possible to get scared, because then the price drops and they start buying during the crash. They collect it, they wait, they sit on it for 1, 2, 3, 6, 12 months. Typically, let's say they wait 3 to 6 months with it, and then they do the same thing in the opposite direction. They start pushing the communication positively, and then they start selling. And this means, in such cases, that they can pull out a significant percentage from a market. So now let's take let's say a $50 million market cap, and let's say a $10 million liquidity pool. From this, they can pull out even $2 to $3 million. This money, they take this away from the community. But things like this happen, and it always works to some degree of efficiency. It just matters what that efficiency is. So here, it depends on how much the community trusts, how much they believe in the long term, and how easily they can be scared. So panic must be avoided. It's inevitable that such a situation will arise. In reality, there can be minimal influence here because you can't always see the signs. But if you can see the signs, then this can actually be counteracted to some extent with positive news. If there happens to be, let's say, a market player who can be announced at that moment, but we haven't announced them until then, so you can fight against it. It takes up a huge amount of energy, and it's doubtful how effective it is. What you should pay attention to, though, is the tone in which you communicate on social media. If there is something, a question that arises, it matters how that question is posed. By the way, we've come across some really great positive examples lately where we've received questions that were really well structured, very thoughtful, and phrased in a really good style. That's good. That's good because if someone doesn't understand something and wants to understand it, and they do that in a way which there are a lot of good examples of right now, that strengthens things because it's a normal thing that a person doesn't understand everything. By the way, with this, I've kind of moved on to another topic. So, how that assumes a living community. And anyway, and if we're talking about who understands what and who doesn't, if we really think about it, Pete, and I'm saying this primarily to you, if we weren't the ones working on this, if we only had some tangential connection to it, well, I don't think we'd understand a lot of it. Because it's a very complex, very complicated, and not a simple topic. So, I mean, some really great questions came in, and it's totally understandable that that not everything is clear. And Sudi is right that if a lot of people don't understand something, then the problem is definitely on our end. But I also think it's true that it's unimaginable for someone who isn't deeply involved in this, let's say like we are from our side, to understand everything. So, and it's really great that there were questions. Okay, so regarding the exchange rate of Moss coin, that's what I can say. And you can't say something like that. So anyone who says in this situation that in the next 2 months it will rise by as much again as it has risen now, that person is an amateur. You can't say things like that. Anything can happen, and whatever happens, that's normal in this world and in this market. In the long run, the situation is completely different because in the long run, while you can find exceptions in the market, in the long run, a blockchain that has real utility and good projects come onto it and use it, its value goes up. And by the way, if we examine why it is that with two useful, good blockchains, one might have tripled its price in 3 years, while the other one multiplied it by 300. Well, you can't always give a rational explanation for that. So, in hindsight, you can read something into it, but the explanation isn't always logical. However, there are negligibly few examples, or very few examples, of a perfectly usable blockchain that has good projects coming onto it, is being used, and yet the price doesn't go up nicely. And by the way, there are examples of this too, but they are very, very few. Regarding the price, that's all that can be said. And the situation is that whenever you ask things like this, and these questions have been coming in since the start, there is intentionally no answer to them. So it's not even that. There is no answer to this. So you can't say that with this much ether this month, the exchange rate will be this much. That doesn't exist.
Let's say this. Besides the fact that, of course, we are also satisfied and happy to see the trust, and that the Mosaic exchange rate has started in a good direction and is in an upward trend.
Yes, and that is very, very positive. So this says that our community really understands how this works, and what could have been dumped onto the market wasn't dumped either. In fact, many people bought in because we roughly doubled the exchange rate, or rather, you doubled it, or the market doubled it. And that is very good. Let's move on. Is it absolutely necessary to have both a MetaMask and a subwallet? No. Sorry, what?
Answer it.
Or go ahead and answer it then.
Actually, no, because you can also manage an Ethereum address with Subwallet, but it's a matter of preference.
Yeah, I would say that for anyone who is already used to and regularly uses MetaMask, it's probably better for them to use either Subwallet or one of the others. Let's say Polkadot recommended it, so we recommend Subwallet. And for EVM things, use MetaMask. However, for those who haven't used MetaMask before, it's unnecessary. Because, well, I use it because it's always been this way and I'm used to it, but it's a scandalously shitty wallet. Of course, in some respects it's not shitty, but it's shitty to use. If you have to get used to a new one anyway, you're better off with Subwallet, and then you can manage both your EVM and substrate stuff in it, meaning the Mosaic things. Okay. The next topic is very adorable. What about those who didn't mint NFTs and meme coins? The answer to that is simple. They are waiting to be minted. Right, so this needs to be done. The situation is that it's in everyone's best interest for this to get started. We naively assumed that the person who has the absolute biggest interest in this is the one who bought it. And we assumed that there wouldn't really be any examples of this. Well, things like this happen. There isn't really much you can do, or rather, there would be things you could do technically. For now, we are waiting for it to be minted. There are ideas about what kind of solutions could be introduced, but for now, the simplest thing is to wait, and obviously we can't wait 10 years for it. So then, we'll figure something out so that governance can vote on what should happen and how it should happen. By the way, technologically, there are countless solutions, but it's much better if it gets minted in every case. So, that's what can be said regarding this. But I'm talking way too much, and I'm not letting poor Petey get a word in. The next question.
The next question is mine then. Will there be, and if so, when can we expect a Validator NFT marketplace? We are working on it. The trading of Validator NFTs will start this year. That's all we can say about this.
Yes, and by the way, this topic will come up again, and we'll go into a bit more detail there.
You can vote on it.
Yes, that is absolutely correct.
What can be expected in the long and short term in the current year?
But actually, we already discussed this earlier.
Yes. Why is it important for those who haven't done so yet to mint and lock in their mosaic as soon as possible? I bet this is Kasui's question. In both the short and long term, everyone benefits the most, especially those who have an NFT and a mosaic, if they mint and lock it, since without that, they won't receive block rewards and transaction fees. Short and sweet, that's what we can reiterate. Obviously, the sooner they do it, the better off they'll be. So I encourage everyone.
Yes. So, that's the smartest thing you can do, and there really aren't any counter arguments. Obviously, for those who desperately need that money, they don't really have another choice. They have to sell it. However, for those who aren't in that situation, there's no more rational decision than this. So, we encourage everyone to do it. I just suspect that those who are here now are not the ones who didn't mint it out. So let's say they're the good ones. Yes, well, we noted it down as the asset hub topic, but in reality, it's not just an asset hub topic. And there are important things here that, in the long run, I think are very positive. But let's start from the beginning. Asset hub. A question came up. What is the asset hub, and why is it good for us?
I'd like to steal this question from you, but you can do it too.
Yeah,
I'd like to steal this question.
okay. Then I'll hand over the floor.
What is the Asset Hub? The Asset Hub is practically the part of the Polkadot ecosystem where all kinds of crypto assets are available. This is the part of the Asset Hub. This is the part of the Polkadot ecosystem that all centralized exchanges, for example, are connected to, and this is the part where all tokens available to the outside world in a standardized way circulate within Polkadot. What does this mean? Anyone who has assets on the Asset Hub can actually move freely around the world. You have seen this too. Actually, when you want to bring USDC or USDT into Mosaic or take it out of Mosaic in the Mosaic Explorer, the first step is that you have to bring it from the Asset Hub to Mosaic or take it from Mosaic to the Asset Hub. Think of this practically as Polkadot's asset management interface, because this Asset Hub is really the key to easily accessing the liquidity available on centralized exchanges. In short and in summary, that is why the connection is important. And yeah, it's essential. This is one of our legs with which we connect to the world.
Yes, and perhaps the what illustrates this well is why it is practical and reasonable to start with this solution. By the way, it can be added that there isn't really anything else, so that's another question, but we'll say a few words about that too. Because, sure, let's take USDC as an example. Right, this is the second largest dollar peg stablecoin. Circle is the issuer. You can bring this in by building a bridge and bringing it over from another chain. This is a serious development. It has to be constantly protected, maintained, etc. by someone, but, well, if we are doing it, then by us. And the other solution is that Circle itself, which is the issuer of USDC, creates and issues it directly within the ecosystem. They do this on the Asset Hub, right? The Polkadot ecosystem has been operating for a long time. It's big, proven, and so on. Circle put the effort into issuing it there. I think that, let's say, an issuer the size of Circle simply won't even talk to blockchains that are younger than 2 or 3 years old. Unless, let's say, a Jeff Bezos or an Elon Musk creates it. So, otherwise, they won't talk to them, no matter what. Because it can be solved in other ways, but they won't bring it in directly. So, this is a story accepted by everyone. To be fair, or rather, to tell the whole story, it's also part of it that the Polkadot ecosystem is visibly transforming. So there are processes, and here we can bring up the example of Asset Hub, which has appeared in many places. Let's say 3, 4, 5 years ago, the Polkadot ecosystem and, Gavin Wood, who is, by the way, a huge mind and has created amazing things and is probably in the top 10 or top 20 for sure in the blockchain world. He originally wanted to create an ecosystem as his vision, where the central player, this relay chain, Polkadot, connects the chains, handles a bunch of things, provides security for those chains that, let's say, don't have as many validators, and so on. However, every participant brings some kind of service into the entire ecosystem, and they will be successful because they are the ones who brought it in, and they do it well. However, more and more of those have appeared, let's say in the last year or year and a half, where the Web3 Foundation, Parity, or let's put it this way, Gavin Wood and his team started competing with one of the ecosystem members. And obviously, from their position, they can dominate, they reshaped the operation, and with that, one project or another lost its relevance. So that's how Asset Hub appeared as well. You can argue about whether that's good or not, or what the pros and cons are. There are downsides. For us, the downside was basically that we should have just developed an XCM, maybe hacked it together in 3 days so we could operate on hydration, but instead we had to put in roughly 3 months of development to create our own DEX. Which, is what you have to use to operate it because, well, I don't want to get too deep into that right now. There's a switch happening on the Mosaic chain and on Asset Hub too, but the point here is that the token is registered on Asset Hub because that's what's accepted, so it had to be done differently. However, the players in the ecosystem aren't happy that this is the direction things are taking. So, well, if we look at the fact that the DOT exchange rate was even over $50, and it was consistently over $20 or $30, but now it's under $1, it was 70 cents today. There's no denying that it signals a problem. So, we have to acknowledge that in the Polkadot ecosystem, there's a lot going on here because the Polkadot ecosystem was envisioned by Gavin Wood. What processes it went through is also a factor. But otherwise, Gavin Wood has a new technology, a new dream. And, that's what's important to him now. Here, things are happening that you just can't ignore. This might cause us problems in the short term, but remember back. Well, anyone who has been here from the beginning has surely heard us say multiple times that the Mosaic chain is an independent block. It is designed and built to be able to function as an independent blockchain. By the way, I don't know if we are completely unique in this or not. I think that, yes, but it wasn't important enough for me to check if anyone else had thought of this. No, it's not typical. For us, we said back then too, that we need the Polkadot ecosystem itself at the beginning because it has infrastructure and solutions that are great not to have to develop from scratch. This is still needed, however. We see the bottlenecks here, so there is definitely no reason to say there is trouble or panic. However, it can be stated that we need to address what Plan B or possibly Plan C options are, and we are working on that. This means that if a very, very unlikely bad situation were to arise with the Polkadot ecosystem, then we have a solution for that. Obviously it's not good, because then resources have to be diverted elsewhere, but no fatal problem will happen to us. However, the development here is that in our research and development questions, like how to proceed technologically, what moves to make business-wise, we're starting to see the outlines of opportunities that we hadn't counted on before, so it's exciting. Nothing is at a stage where it has been deeply and thoroughly examined, both technologically and business-wise. However, there are definitely some interesting things. What does this mean? The goal is not to leave the Polkadot ecosystem. This is an important thing. However, we are capable of leaving it, both technologically and business-wise, without any problems. This should be understood as, well, that there is a solution for everything. What is unpleasant about this? And, we are already experiencing this because, well, it's not just the case with Asset Hub, but it takes up a lot of extra time in quite a few cases here. And by the way, this whole Asset Hub story, that it wasn't hydration, so hydration couldn't get started. This specifically took away development time from the mountain, that is, from the Mosaic translator. So, well, these are unpleasant things, but this actually holds opportunities as well. Moreover, it might be that the complexity of the Mosaic chain is that it's truly robust, large, and has many validators. With this, we might also be an escape route for smaller blockchains. But let's not get ahead of ourselves, because otherwise, this is technically true in any case. Business-wise, there are no deep, substantive negotiations going on with other chains. But it is clearly visible that from the direction of projects with whom we otherwise have no technological connection, inquiries have started on their part to get to know us. So they have started to notice that here it is worth keeping in touch with us. So this is an important thing. But I think it's not worth talking more about this right now. If you take on the CEX question, and I think it's very exciting here. The exciting, not positively exciting. Right. The lesson here is what happened in the General 6 case.
I'll take it on, and then you can add to it later. So is a CEX listing necessary? This question comes up from time to time, and our answer regarding it is always twofold. One is that it's necessary, but not just yet. Right, these are the two things we usually say. When is a CEX listing necessary, and why shouldn't you jump into it immediately? A CEX listing is worth doing when we compare it with an announcement that is understandable and useful to the world, and a positive announcement at that. So the opinion within the House remains, and this is the most important stance, that a CEX listing will take place when there are already more projects on the chain, and we can make a big announcement. We would like to organize it in parallel with that. And even then, it will be a very, very big question as to which exchange we organize it on. And this is this is what Attila was also referring to, that, for example, it's very easy, right? First here, so Binance, Bybit, it's very, very difficult to get onto such big exchanges in one step. You can target second-tier exchanges in times like these. And as we can see, there's a pretty high chance, especially in a bear market like this, that you might bet on the wrong horse. With the Gen 6 team, it happened that they paid the liquidity and everything for the listing, and 3 days later, that exchange just pulled the rug. I don't even remember which one it was. Something.
Bitmart.
So with 3x's, you have to be careful for several reasons. On one hand, we'd like to wait for the optimal time, the moment when it can be paired with an announcement. On the other hand, the maintenance cost is insanely high. Third part. By the way, I think you guys will be the ones voting on when we go, which CEX, or rather, which CEX we go to, for example, from several CEX options. At least that's my gut feeling and my thought, that it will happen during that period. Actually, we are in that period right now, but by then, it might be full on-chain governance that will vote on it.
Yeah, and by the way, something else worth considering is that the role of DXs in the market is becoming increasingly valued. And if we look at just one indicator, and in this respect, it is a relevant indicator, namely what percentage of current trading volume takes place on CEXs versus DEXs, then for many years now, there has been an unstoppable growth trend toward DEXs. And, this ratio is not affected by the fact that, generally speaking, trading volume is lower in a bear market, because it's lower on both CEXs and DXs. But DXs are gaining value, and they are being used in more and more places. Whether a DEX is truly decentralized or not is a completely separate topic, because it also matters which DEX you go to. I don't want to get sidetracked, but there are some interesting and instructive stories here. However, there still aren't the same risks as with a CEX. And besides the fact that it's very expensive to get listed, and PD mentioned that it's expensive to maintain, a CEX forces projects into things that not only involve costs, but are also just not good. Because there's no sugarcoating this. You have to generate fake volume. It's a requirement, because if you don't generate, I'm just pulling a number out of thin air here, say $1 million in weekly volume. Now that might not be the exact number, but they'll simply delist you from the exchange. But at the same time, they require that there be a certain number of registered users on the exchange who hold the given token there, and this has to be constantly managed. You have to deal with this, and it costs money. It eats up money. Simply put, not just in the current situation, but for quite a long time, it has more disadvantages than advantages. If someone wants to skim the market with meme coins in the short term, then you need to be on a bunch of exchanges sooner, because that's how that world works. And by the way, a meme coin also gets onto an exchange more easily and with fewer requirements. Because meme coins, they generate huge volume for 6, 12, 18, 24 months. They utilize all kinds of leveraged services, etc., etc. That generates much more revenue for the exchange, whereas a normal project is only worth it for the exchange if it increases its volume, artificially brings in users, and they just list it. So, in a nutshell, our opinion about CEXs hasn't changed from before, but the proportions have shifted a bit. So the weight of the factors has shifted a little. I'll be honest, and I know that this isn't how we're approaching it, and this isn't how it should be done, but I wouldn't even care about that. It's a bit of an exaggeration, but if we only got on a CEX when the project is already so big that the CEX lists the coin on its own, because it simply wants us to be present there. We probably won't wait for that, because there are market periods and levels of development where it's already worth being there, but this CEX issue is becoming less and less of an important factor. Obviously, when you talk to traders, what's important to them is which exchange it's on and where it's listed. Obviously, traders are also needed so that traders can trade the coins, but in reality, in the long run, and so this isn't such an important factor. It's just that they are usually the loud ones, because in reality, most YouTube channels dealing with crypto are specifically about trading. But blockchain technology isn't about trading. At most, it's just one aspect of it. So DEX solutions are perfectly good. And let's say this will also depend on how the projects come along. Those big, serious projects, the ones I hope you'll know about as soon as possible, but really in the coming months, will launch on the chain. For those, this isn't a factor, because in those cases, crypto usually isn't even a question. They know that they have to pay a transaction fee. Otherwise, it's not a factor, because we're not talking about crypto projects. Alpha questions? Should I say them? So, should I go ahead or start?
Go ahead.
Okay. The central question we were left with was this. Exactly what happened immediately following the repeal of last year's legislative changes? There was a real crisis situation last year, and this needs to be understood why. Because it was simply impossible to know for sure whether what we were doing had been classified as a criminal offense or not. It turned out later, but it was impossible to know, because that information from which it could have been deciphered that it didn't need to be, that it didn't count as a criminal offense, came later, but it was impossible to know. And it is really a completely different situation when something which turns out along the way not to be working properly or functioning as intended, that is just fundamentally different from a scenario where something is actually a criminal offense. It is important to distinguish between a simple mistake and a deliberate violation of the law. Why? For one thing, the fact that with certain things, it's not entirely clear what is regular and what isn't. And let's say after a long debate, it turns out it was irregular. That's an unpleasant situation. It might even come with a fine, but it's likely that you just have to correct the mistake. If something is a criminal offense, they immediately shut down operations, the operation of everything. And, a procedure starts. In the meantime, you can't work, and a long litigation begins, which, well, in quotes, it doesn't matter if 5 years later, when it concludes, it turns out it wasn't a crime after all. By then, the project is already ruined. So this is a completely different story, and it was impossible to know where it belonged. So there were a lot of hours spent with lawyers and hours spent together with lawyers. Not one, not two, but at least three, but more like 3 or 4 lawyers we were running this in parallel with. And, the safe thing to do was to stop it. It couldn't be brought in. By the way, that was also on the table, but Petey and I both categorically said that we wouldn't do anything like that, no matter what. We'd rather go to prison than not be able to transfer it out. But, we could transfer it out. We allowed it to go out, but it couldn't go in. Well, then later on, but much later, it turned out that Mosaic Alpha didn't fall into the category of a criminal offense, but even so, the situation in Hungary was, well, let's say it was pretty exceptionally lousy. This has now been resolved. Alpha has also launched, so it's up and running now. I don't know how deep we should get into this. There are a lot of developments that couldn't be launched because it turned out during testing that there were changes and so on. So there are still developments in the pipeline. It can be used. It works well. Really?
I would just add one more thing to the previous point. That the power of decentralization is that even though we were able to remove these things from the interface, otherwise, if someone had called the contract, they would have been able to use it just the same, both ways. That's already decentralized. Nobody can pull that anymore. This is just a random aside, an interjection, that we obviously had to remove these functions from the interface. Anyone who wanted to could have still bought and sold through the contracts, no matter what we did. That's the power of decentralization, by the way, that you can buy from the website, but by talking to the blockchain, everyone has access to everything just the same.
Yeah, so the situation is that, yes, it can be solved in such cases that, so we aren't able to block the ability to withdraw the money either. For most people, it causes a problem if the interface isn't there for it.
Sure, obviously.
But, for this,
I was just about to emphasize that we're talking about the interface.
yes, Tornado Cash is a really good example of this. It's an Ethereum mixer, which I don't even know. I think in 2023, the authorities at the time started to go after. The FBI shut it down, and they took it offline, and a huge amount of money was stuck. But people were able to slowly get it out, so those solutions became widespread. Well, since then, although all sanctions against Tornado Cash have been lifted, and it's working again now. But anyway, I just wanted to get to the point, which I think will come up later, that it's also exciting what changes will be in Mika 2.0. But we are preparing for these, so there are solutions for them. And we see that, and this is good, that the direction of the Mosaic chain isn't going towards those very wild solutions that are or are expected to be the most persecuted. So I think there will be very few truly unexpected, very extraordinary situations. By the way, this Mosaic Alpha thing, it was like this. Will the Alpha be in Hungarian again? Not for now. Not for now. because precisely due to the fact that we can't intervene, we can't remove USDT from it. It's very easy to solve, to make it work with USDC as well. The fact that USDT could leave from there, we can't decide that by force. And USDT, that's also debatable. And I don't want to get into legal hair splitting right now because if we asked 10 lawyers, there would certainly be some among them who would say something different from the other lawyers. If it contains USDT, then communication cannot be targeted at any European Union member state. If we communicate in Hungarian, then it is targeted at the European Union, and that could cause problems. This one can argue about whether it could cause problems, but one cannot argue about the fact that if we don't target any European Union country in terms of language, then that won't cause any problems. So that's one of the reasons. That doesn't mean it will never happen, but for the near future, there won't be Hungarian. The alpha. Okay. When can we expect the launch of 2.0? How will it be different from the current alpha platform? It will be different in a great many things. You see, it's being developed by external developers here, so the development itself has already started. The experience so far with that development team is that they get it done on time. So what does the launch depend on? What kind of things are there? 2.0 has much more functionality, a lot of things. It will handle many more situations than the current one. Some of these require permits. There's an important business decision here. Is it worth launching 2.0 with the parts that require permits, say, turned off? Or does it only make sense when those can be done too? Right, this is something outside of the Mosaic team, right, for the launchpad as well. I don't know if the permit is already in place or if it will be soon, but that goes for the launchpad, and those permits cover the functionality of the launchpad. At this moment, it's not clear to me whether those cover the functionality of Alpha 2.0. Well, if they do cover it, then that's great. But I'm not sure about that, and we're not sure. So, a lot of things could still depend on this. The development itself, won't be the bottleneck. So, that's all that can be said about that. But what is very important and fixed, is that it will have the same codex as 1.0. So its operation is the same. This should be understood as, obviously, it's created on a different technology, a different chain, from a different contract, but it's the same money. So winning over that market increases the value of the codexa in the market, as well as the possibilities for its use. So I like codexa. By the way, not only do I hold it, but I also buy it sometimes. I don't have a exact, precise plan for when or how much I buy, but I just tend to buy codex randomly, and I'm completely calm. And I understand why many people think it's not good. Obviously, a situation like the one that happened there, because of the Hungarian regulations, that didn't do codexa any good. But this is actually a really good situation to be able to get it cheaply. And codexa isn't going to disappear, and the new alpha will only strengthen codexa further. Where can I exchange codexa? Well, I would exchange it on alpha, but you can also do it on maxi. And I would talk here, even though we didn't talk about the maxi stuff.
What do you mean by that?
Right. I mean, that, we are on a CEX there. That's why we're there. And
I get it.
And, we didn't handle this situation properly beforehand because back then the situation wasn't even the same as it is now. So back then it was much more expected in the market for a project to appear on a CEX, but this causes much more hassle than benefit. The situation is that we are there on MXC. We have to constantly deal with which parameter the exchange requires from us. These were pre-established rules. How's it going? There too, a sufficient number of people need to hold their tokens there. It is specified how much they need to hold. It costs a hell of a lot of money to have to generate the volume. And it's completely normal that a project like this doesn't have independent organic traffic yet. By the way, the situation is that Codexa can still be very successful and very good, even if it's normal that it doesn't have such high volume on a CEX. So these experiences, and by the way, the market changes, these are very important. So that's what I wanted to add. And the burn-in. Why was the burn-in necessary? This is the best thing. But go ahead and say it, P.
Yes, the one that was swapped. The question was, the Codexa swap has now closed. Why was it necessary to burn those Codex tokens that were swapped within this framework? Well, because the swap, the Codexa to Mosaic swap, is one way, and that Codexa, the Mosaic that was swapped, is no longer convertible back. So that Codexa was destroyed. It ceased to exist, the one that was swapped, In other words, this Codexa had to be burned.
Yes, and with that, the codexes you have collected become significantly more valuable than before. Right, and
For sure.
One, the fundamental value of money is primarily determined by the total amount currently in circulation alongside the overall size and productive capacity of the economy itself. It is a delicate balance that shifts over time. This means, this is an economic principle that you can't take as a perfect rule in the crypto world one-to-one. But the principle is still that all the codexes are worth something. Let's say it's worth X. If you happen to hold half of these codexes and we were to go ahead and destroy the other half, then all of the remaining codexes currently in circulation would certainly still retain their value. In fact, because the total supply has been reduced so drastically, the actual value per individual unit will inevitably increase significantly. So every token holder everywhere is always happy when some of that codexa or that token is burned, because the positive effect of that always shows up sooner or later. And by the way, there was one more thing here that was important for a while. We planned from the beginning that these would be burned, but actually, when that BTK law came in, which applied to the exchange, then by burning them, that doesn't count as an exchange. But if it hadn't been a burn, then that would have raised questions again. It's not even clear that it would have been a problem, but since that wasn't the reason for the burning anyway, so this wasn't a question. So we went through the alpha questions. Should I let you speak? The comment.
I think it's from Smellwork.
Or I'll take that too, but then sometime later.
You'll join in on that later.
Okay. The thing is, the first question is why there was a longer silence around the PR project. I'll be honest, when I read this, I was kind of surprised because, we're developing and for us, it's a constant topic. Then we thought it through and we talked about it with Sudi and now, yes, I admit that less info was going out. The main reason for this was, that the development that's going on is going on. And we can't communicate about the partners we're working with, testing with, and are in contact with. And by the way, it was in there, but in this whole thing, it actually took up 2 or 3 weeks. He is, one of the founders and architects of the Mosaic Trust Network. There was a family tragedy there, which, by the way, didn't stop the development, but it definitely slowed it down. Because the development of the mountain is quite like a conductor's room where, Marcus really keeps an eye on everything, supporting and helping everyone. So he is really the pulse of this whole thing, but it's still moving forward, just not with the same momentum. So what can we know about it? The development is partially complete. Partially complete means that the important critical core engine, the heart of it, that is done. Besides, there's no such thing as something being completely finished because, there's always some development going on. At the beginning, the Mosaic Trust Network will be able to do 3 things, and in the future, much more. However, right now, we need to focus on current market relationships and the partners that are in prospect. So what it can already do, that is already working now. Yeah, this is invoice fraud, this protection against invoice fraud, and the DID, so this decentralized identity management. And we are very close to put it simply, having a solution that is a competitor to DocuSign. Now, don't think that will be as big as DocuSign by tomorrow. From a technical standpoint, however, it is quite clearly and unquestionably a more secure solution. And not just at the system operation level, but also a much clearer solution for the users. This isn't actually completely finished yet, but what does it mean that, say, invoice fraud and decentralized identity management are in place? It means the system is already capable of operating this, but you can't use it today because, well, you have to build interfaces for it. You have to create API connections. These aren't exactly big, groundbreaking developments on their own, nor are they particularly risky or complex developments where we might get stuck or run into major issues, but nevertheless, they still absolutely need to be done and completed as part of our process. Here, regarding the partners, the API connections are what are really critical because there are simpler API connections and very robust ones. Here, we really need some very robust. This doesn't mean these are months-long developments, but they aren't 1 or 2 day developments either. And once these are done, that's when the further testing comes in. We need to carry out the testing of these subcomponents, and then the integration begins. For the integration, obviously, we have to put in all the help we can, but part of the integration isn't on our end, but rather with those other sites. I am intentionally bringing up a point right now that isn't technically on the table for our discussion today. However, in order for us to actually be able to utilize this feature within the broader Microsoft framework, someone over on that side of the development team really has to step in and make it possible for the system to properly handle it. It's not a huge development there either, but it has to be done. And those can only start now, because until now, it wasn't possible to start them. If everyone who isn't on our side were to focus on this, and it were a main task, then these would be tasks of a few weeks. But, these decision-making processes and consultations can drag things out. So technically, it could actually start much sooner. But we're saying that towards the end of the year, let's say in December, the first customer transaction will appear there. Because we see that all these little things, time can really slip away with them. So that's how it looks. Otherwise, in the future, it can be used for a lot of things, and it will have a very serious role. How deep should we go into this? The situation is that the kind of decentralized identity management we can offer the market, I won't say there's nothing similar, but we've looked quite thoroughly at what solutions are out there. There really isn't anything else on the market that is this simple, this efficient, this versatile, and this secure. This doesn't mean that better and better solutions won't come along later. Because identity management is going to be such a fundamental operation in the entire digital space, and we are going to switch over to using these so quickly, and precisely because those who want to exercise control, the tech companies, the states, and the EU is also moving full steam ahead in this direction, will force all kinds of digital service providers to have to operate with digital identity. Fortunately, it currently looks like the regulations are giving full space to decentralized identity management in this regard. And not only will the market realize this soon, but it is already apparent that many very serious players know exactly what the difference is between decentralized and non-decentralized identity management. And among those who understand it, there are very few exceptions for whom decentralized isn't the better option. However, there aren't many solutions on the market yet that can handle it as well as the Mosaic Trust Network. And well, this advantage, this needs to be leveraged very quickly because this is tangible and easy to understand right now. So well, really the most important thing for all of us right now is that the Mosaic Trust Network first of all needs to launch, needs to start being visible in the market and on the blockchain. And then, one after another, new areas will continuously emerge where it can be used. And simply in the market, we need to gain market share while we still have the advantage that others can't do many of these things. Right. Yes. So you promised that by September, the big project could launch on it with 100,000 transactions. Right. I vowed that we will never state a number again. Anyway, because I remember exactly one occasion when I did state numbers. And now questions have come up, and well, not even today, but already like 2 weeks ago. Well, we are searching, digging into where those numbers could have come from. But we will talk about that too. Actually, I didn't say 100,000. I said a larger number. You know that that big project, it's still in a phase where they are putting a hell of a lot of work into it on that side as well. It doesn't even come up that they won't use it. So you could say that there's a very high chance it's a done deal. But otherwise, there's no agreement on paper yet because you can only sign a contract when every component, everything is checked. Everything can be tested, can be audited, because until then, you can't sign a contract. We see that. They need it. As of today, you could say that. There really isn't much else. Well, there would be others, but they wouldn't be as good. They'd be a different kind of solution. So it could be solved in other ways, but this, well, this simply, and with these costs, there really isn't another solution today. So you could say that in this, context, this is definitely reliable. Well, technically, like I said again, it could perhaps even start in September, but there are not just technical issues, it won't start in September. December is completely realistic. If something happens, then maybe sooner. But we see how things are progressing. And here, not for us, by the way, at Mosaic Trust Network, things are progressing very well. What slowed it down was primarily these extra polka dot developments. That you can expect that there. Why is this good for the chain and the validator? Well, this is good on several levels, but the first basic case is that it brings life to the chain in the short term. And if life comes to the chain, then that directly affects what the value of the Mosaic chain and the Mosaic coin is. As one of my colleagues said here, this should simply be handled in one sentence. It generates demand for the Mosaic coin, but it's much more than that because the Mosaic Trust Network will be a framework that will offer benefits to a lot of projects for whom it will simply be a crucial factor which blockchain they move to. And there will be those who move to the Mosaic chain because there is a MTN. Right. With this DID solution, with this verifiable credentials, how should we translate that? We already translated it once as verifiable credentials or all right, we'll talk about what exactly this is, how it works, and what its benefits are some other time.
There's no Hungarian name for it.
There's no good Hungarian name for it. Okay. What will be the first project? When is it expected? Well, either this very big project will be the first, or a logistics project will be the first. This depends on many things, but these are all short term. So these are solutions arriving within a few months. Why? But a question came up here about why they chose us. What can be known about it? This question can be understood as referring to the Mosaic Trust Network itself And one can also understand the question as referring to that big player who, like Columbo's wife, is mysteriously, working here with us. The big player, I've simply already outlined that just a moment ago. They have a problem, which is this invoice forgery, and we can provide a very suitable answer for them regarding this. And there isn't really any other option. It could be solved without other blockchains, etc. But that doesn't offer the same solution as we do. So in reality, one part of it is that's why they chose us. Why did the Mosaic Trust Network choose us? What you need to know about this is that one of the founders, the architect, and the visionary behind the Mosaic Trust Network is the main investor and one of the owners of the IOP B2IPI solution. And since these prior agreements were already in place, the decision was made that all the technology, just in a more modern form, would be integrated into the Mosaic Trust Network. Since it's the same circle of interests and things like that, the role of the Mosaic Trust Network is prioritized. Because, by the way, the Mosaic Trust Network will be able to do pretty much everything, not at launch, but after continuous development. Everything that the IOPI and the B2IPI can do. And that is certainly on the table for discussion. However, essentially, it really does not have much significant business impact or long-term consequence. From a broader marketing and strategic communication perspective, though, it absolutely does matter quite a bit exactly which platforms are utilized and precisely what names certain services will operate under in the future. For the validators, the transaction volume, and the users, it doesn't matter at all. In fact, it only truly matters when it comes to the way we handle our communication. It is simply a matter of how we convey information. There's still quite a few open questions that we need to address here, but since it is more or less the same group of players involved in this process, it is really not a critical issue that should cause us any major concern at this stage. In some specific places, there are definitely valid considerations where an existing client might strongly prefer to stick with a certain name for their project. Anyway, let's not get too bogged down in those details right now, as it is a complex topic. We will certainly have plenty of time to talk about that later on when we have more clarity. We will report back on exactly how this is going to happen. Right now, the most important and urgent thing is for the Mosaic Trust Network to launch. By the way, you should also know why. Well, quite simply because the things that the Mosaic Trust Network solves can be solved on a substrate-based blockchain, or rather, this is where they can be solved best. This was the fundamental problem with IOPI as well, that they couldn't develop it in that direction because the blockchain itself wasn't evolving further. Now, beyond what the plan was back then, the Mosaic Trust Network has an architecture that has been completely redesigned from the ground up, so this opens up even more possibilities. On one hand, there are the trust relationships, and on the other, the Mosaic blockchain is a standout player because it's built on substrate technology. For one thing, because of the number of validators, and for another, Mosaic has laid down a blockchain foundation that is much more robust and versatile than average. It's a framework that you can build on in a stable and effective way. Currently, of course, things still need to be built on top of this, but you can only create a solution like this on a foundation like that. There really aren't any other substrate-based chains currently on the market that can offer this specific level of functionality. Sure, there are always technical aspects or trade-offs you could argue about with any given blockchain project, but when you look at the big picture, it can now be confidently stated that Mosaic is truly an outstanding blockchain ecosystem. And I think when you consider the long-term potential and the unique architecture they've built, it's clear they are setting a new standard for the entire industry.
Mosaic OS.
OS. I'll let you talk now.
I think so. The continuous development of Mosaic OS is in full swing, The beta versions are coming out one after another. We're already at Beta 7, which came out on August 5th. I wouldn't go into too much detail about the changelog or what's changed right now. That can be read on the Mosaic OS website. We also appeared on XDA, you know? There's actually quite a lot of interest, well, for XDA standards. Since we appeared on XDA and started communicating, we've been checking which IPs it's being downloaded from. Our downloads have become quite international, but obviously Hungary is still the main focus in terms of who's downloading. There was a question like, if I see it correctly, it went live today. It was live before too, but we are still in beta, so keep in mind that while I think it's stable, I've actually been using Mosaic OS for the past year and a half, to be honest. But technically, we're still in beta. I think by the end of this year or early next year, we'll reach the point where we can say it's no longer beta, but stable. Because we'd like to see a relatively large amount of usage before that. It's not live, only Beta 7 became a live version. Will there be, and if so, when will there be an app store? There is a Mosaic store right now, which currently primarily contains the basic applications belonging to Mosaic OS. Oh, by the way, Attila even showed the map.
Yes, this isn't current because it's just a screenshot. This is at least 2 weeks old, or more like 3.
Yes. Where is it from? Where did they download the web? This is actually the statistics for the web installer page, because, for those who have a Google Pixel, they can just plug their device in via USB and install Mosaic OS through the web installer. I should add that whatever was on the phone screen, or rather on the phone itself, will obviously be lost if you hard flash it from another ROM. So let's not start updating our current phone unless we've backed up the data. But with a new phone, there's no such risk. Getting back to it. So the Mosaic App Store currently contains basic applications. We've talked to several people who would like to get in. GSX users also want their app to appear there. Basically, we don't see any reason why it shouldn't be included. But fundamentally, this app store wasn't created with the goal of having an infinite number of apps, but rather a curated selection of a few apps that complement the core functionality well, and that we can say work well for this purpose. Here you go, it's in the Mosaic App Store. And of course, if there will be Mosaic applications, which will surely come sooner or later. But although for now we see that the better direction is that there is no separate Mosaic wallet, but rather substrate-based wallets already exist for the hardware. We use those. But if there is a Mosaic application, it will obviously appear in the Mosaic store. And it's still a common question whether it will work on other types of phones. It won't be able to work on other types of phones. We don't have the resources to open up support for other phones on Mosaic OS besides the Google Pixel series. Basically, we can't do that, and that's just it. There aren't enough of us. We don't have that many resources. We can operate on the hardware that is listed. Right, we now support all Pixels, so, Beta 6. I think with Beta 6, we support the latest 10 series too, but with Beta 7 for sure. But other than that, we can't support any other phone hardware. This could also depend on phone hardware manufacturers, so if there happens to be some kind of partnership in the future with some manufacturer, we are not in active discussions with them, I should add. So I wasn't predicting that, don't get me wrong, but there were thoughts internally that we should get in touch with a phone hardware manufacturer as well. Mainly because Google is trying to lock down the Android ecosystem, totally. And we wouldn't want it to be locked down, and this can be bypassed to some extent through a phone manufacturer partnership, just as Graphene OS is trying to do. It is on the roadmap that we are talking, but there is currently no such partner. I just mentioned this as an aside. There was a request here about whether a user can keep their privacy profile and their open profile on one phone, Yes, that's partly what the OS is about, that you can separate your activities into multiple profiles. For example, I have a separate banking profile, a separate profile for calls and texts, and a separate profile where I put all sorts of random apps. In fact, Mosaic OS even has a hidden profile feature. So it's a profile that others can't actually see, not even in the profile list, unless they open it with a specific code. By the way, we added this feature ourselves. It's not even in Graphene OS. This is like an extra privacy account that nobody actually knows exists, and it's not even there on the visitor screen. That's pretty much all I thought to cover about Mosaic OS. And we also received quite a few questions.
Yes, here, what I think is worth mentioning is that we often feel the need to talk much more about how much better it is than graphene. That is not the goal. We are not competing with graphene. The goal was, and by the way, there are more and more things that are extra compared to graphene. For one thing, it doesn't even feel right to me because Mosaic OS wouldn't be anywhere if it weren't for graphene. Because that type of solution, that security, that reliability, from a security and privacy perspective, we brought that over from graphene. So, it would be a hugely unethical thing if we were to communicate that we are better than graphene. So that is not the goal. Simply the what the main goal is, and this will be important for Mountain and for many Mosaic blockchain things, is that you can securely add cryptographic solutions that will be needed. And by the way, the original Graphene OS solution presumably doesn't aim to go in this direction with its developments because they maintain a foundation like this. And if they were to go in every direction, then it wouldn't be manageable. After all, it's not a project with hundreds of people working on either. Well, officially it's known that there are roughly 7 to 10 people who are actively and continuously working on this. There are others who contribute, but it's not a huge team. So it's not our goal, and you won't really hear us start trying to prove that Mosaic OS is better. The main aspect is that you can put signing keys into it, not necessarily just for crypto transfers, but simply for a digital signature for operating any kind of device. We can sign that with our key, we can sign a contract, and by the way, even a crypto transfer. And so the range of what these can be used for is very broad and extensive. Plus, by the way, those projects that join our ecosystem, for certain larger projects, it's worth it for us to develop an extra solution if it could be beneficial for that project. It can happen here that the project simply develops what it needs and we integrate it. Or it could be that it's just so important for the entire ecosystem that we can do the whole thing ourselves. So Mosaic OS is a very important player in the ecosystem. However, you also have to see that, no money flows directly into Mosaic OS from anywhere. It's very important because it increases the value of the entire ecosystem. But there are several guys working on it constantly, so a huge amount of energy and money goes into it. And you'd have to be smart. You have to be smart about how you handle those. That's it. It's not that. Since Timothy Chad is written down now, I'll say that.
Go ahead and say it.
Okay. Final test. Yeah, so Timothy chat itself, what the users see, that interface, is going through final tests. There's a very strict list. There is a very long list, actually. It's really very long. What could be implemented in Timothy chat. And then from that, a lot of things are highlighted that we definitely want to implement. And from this list of things we definitely want to implement, there are those items, and it's strict so we don't go beyond it, that must be ready for the launch. These are the most basic operations that an AI aggregator site needs to be able to do. And a question like this also came up, so I'll explain this right away as well. So we are very strict about not letting things in, precisely so that we don't drag out things that could otherwise delay the launch indefinitely. Honestly, I really do think that the current version is already working quite well. However, there are still a few specific things to polish up that could make the overall user experience even better. There are definitely some small details that are still worth working on to really take this to the next level. Actually, it could even launch as it is right now, but there are still some things that need fixing. There are countless modes, situations, and things, and let's say with certain models, if you request a search, it doesn't exactly break the interface, but it just doesn't appear logically. So there are little things like that. So this is already quite close to being ready to launch. And then right here, what does it actually do? Because how is it different? A question came up here about how Timothy Chat is different from other AI language models. The thing is, this isn't an AI language model, but rather an aggregator site where you can access countless language models, and not just language models, but other image generation models and so on, all in one place with a single subscription. I wouldn't say there are a ton of aggregator sites out there, but there are a few. Among these aggregator sites, there are some that are actually very good and come with a very wide list of features. In certain respects, we can't even compete with them today, but we don't really want to either, because for us, the focus on privacy is what matters most. So what Timothy can provide in terms of privacy and the protection of our personal data, which fortunately more and more people are interested in, that level other players cannot provide, or they can only provide it by promising that they won't do this, that, or the other. There are plenty of others who promise it. Let's say I can name one who you can probably actually believe. That would be Proton Solution, for instance, but they only have one single proprietary model. Here, however, you can access those models that typically steal your data. So Claude, ChatGPT, and well, the list goes on. So in fact, you can manage very flexibly which models are included. Right now, the number of models that can be easily integrated is over 200. Actually, I think it's over 300. You don't need that many. There's no point in having that many. You can essentially toggle these on and off. It's not really worth talking about which models will be available because you can easily toggle them on and off, and the market changes so quickly. Timothy Chat can keep up with this continuously, obviously, as we see it today, but this could also change. Right, for ChatGPT, for Claude, for Grok, Gemini, it's a given that models from all of these will be included. You know, the ones that are new and the most relevant. But by the way, there are also a lot of Chinese models that are getting better and better. In fact, there are now Chinese models that, in many respects, rival the best American models and, can be used much more cheaply. These will all be integrated and they will likely be constantly fluctuating. The fact that we will talk a lot about how it is solved and what level of privacy it can provide, because a perfect level is impossible. However, we can ensure that what we promise, the system can definitely deliver. Plus, the system is also smart enough to proactively warn the user the moment it detects that something might pose a potential security risk. It doesn't just sit there, it actively monitors for threats to ensure you are always kept in the loop. And besides, there are actually many other solutions that could be introduced here, which, in our professional opinion, could be implemented in ways that are far more practical and effective for everyone involved, just as we had originally envisioned it when we first started planning this entire project from the ground up. However, I can't really say, at least not regarding anything significant, that Timothy Chat will be able to do something other than privacy that other aggregator sites can't. But that's not a concern anyway, because it's clear there is a demand for it. A question came up about how they can sell and about commissions. Yes, so there will be a web office just the same, and in its basic logic, there will be a similar commission system. Not because there aren't any numbers, but because these can still change. I don't want to give any numbers right now, but you'll be able to grasp them soon. What will you be able to pay with? Well, the word will is important here because eventually you will be able to pay with stablecoins too. But at launch, only credit card payments will work. It is certain now that at launch, only credit card payments will work. But, this is about a monthly subscription, which at launch will be payable either as a monthly or an annual fee. Obviously, the annual fee broken down monthly will work out a bit better, but these are the main things worth knowing. And since we're going to be talking a lot about Timothy Chat in the near future anyway, I wouldn't waste any more of your time now, because we still have a lot of topics to cover. The Launchpad topic. I'll ask for Sudi's help with this. Actually, I'll talk about it a little bit quickly after all. There's a lot of coordination going on here right now. You have to see that. The Launchpad has an external developer. We didn't develop it ourselves. The Launchpad is a very important project in the Mosaic ecosystem because, that's how we expect many projects to come through. One of its pillars, well, fortunately, the Launchpad didn't base its future solely on this, but one of its strong pillars was the plan to provide the only real, proper help for projects launching in the Polycat ecosystem. Well, we see less and less, due to the transformation of the Polycat ecosystem, that this is a long-term relevant function. But, how relevant it will be at the launch is another question. So there are discussions going on in many directions. Regarding the permits, well, to be perfectly honest, we aren't the ones handling those specific documents today. We aren't the ones doing that part of the process. However, I can assure you that the application is also currently in progress. So because of these various moving parts and administrative steps, I really don't dare to give you a firm date on when it will officially launch. But having said that, otherwise everything is looking good and it could potentially start quite soon. And by the way, there are also, let's say these aren't necessarily huge projects, but we also have projects in the pipeline and in our network that are waiting for the Launchpad to start. And what's also important, because many of you have asked, and I like to ask Sudi to help me out with the rest of it, is that these projects at Mountain, which we keep mentioning here, like Columbo's wife, these are not Launchpad projects because there's simply no crypto asset involved. There's no crowdfunding involved. So these will not appear. But the Mosaic chain won't just have those kinds of projects. In fact, the vast majority probably won't be those specific types of projects at all. Based on where we see the broader market heading, we anticipate a shift toward areas where there is significant activity in crowdfunding and tokenization, which will really define the landscape moving forward. But that doesn't mean the Launchpad couldn't be, or shouldn't be, packed full of projects. And we are seeing some good directions taking shape for this. But I can't talk about those just yet. Sudi, are you here?
Of course, yes. What I wanted to add to this is that when those who purchased the Launchpad packages had the opportunity to buy the patron NFT, there is an option for this, which in theory should have been September 30th of last year. And we just said back then that when the Launchpad launches, there will be an option for those who decide they don't want to use their patron NFT for its original purpose to convert it into so-called SAREC. And of course, that option will be available then. However, for those who still want to use their patron NFT for its original purpose, which entitles you to bring a project to the Launchpad, or more precisely, before that, the project has to go through the entire screening system of the incubator hub, you can go ahead and start that. So you can let us know that you have one of these. You can already start preparing for this. Because as we showed you earlier when we introduced the incubator hub, we talked about how it has a very rigorous screening system. The team itself, the management, the legal background, the roadmap, the entire financial and business plan. So all of these are necessary in order to be able to audit the project, both in our interest and, of course, in yours as well. So anyone who would like to can already let us know, so we can work ahead of schedule so that the moment it officially launches, there can immediately be a project ready to go on it. You see, launching a project of this scale is a much longer, more involved period of time. And we do this so that every single part of it can be thoroughly checked and verified, just to ensure it can truly be safely and confidently presented to you.
Super. I honestly don't know if we want to say anything else regarding the launchpad here, or if we should just leave it as it is for now. It's a bit of a tough call.
Well, what's important is that when we presented it to you with Miki Vitesse, the Launchpad interface itself and the Incubator Hub section were what was completed. But of course, this needs to be connected with the Galaxy ecosystem itself. The preparations for these developments are currently underway. Over the past few days, we've been sitting down every single day with the lead developer of the chain, another developer group, developers from there, as well as the project manager, and we've really been working for hours to ensure that every single part, from the MLP token onwards, works. And naturally, as part of the ecosystem, that they function well by the time we reach the point where this can launch. And then projects too. We trust that whoever actually has a Prey Patron NFT, I assume they bought it because they thought it through, that they have an idea or a vision, and they would like to bring a project in the future, with the added benefits that come with that opportunity. So that's all I would have added.
Yes, and the last question that was added was what you expect from the Launchpad. So you have to understand that the Launchpad is a very important part of the ecosystem because it can provide support, and not necessarily just financial, but simply for getting started, to those who want to launch a project in the ecosystem, which can give a very important boost to those who are hesitating about whether to start or where to start on a blockchain. Obviously, these specific projects require a proactive approach, meaning we really need to reach out to the teams involved and maintain consistent, clear communication throughout the process. It is not always easy, though, because there are always going to be complex projects like this that present unique hurdles, requiring us to be even more diligent and patient as we work toward a successful resolution. What's truly important to understand is that a launchpad will only be considered successful and high quality if it rigorously filters and carefully selects the right projects. For this very reason, a dedicated incubator is currently being prepared where experts will deal with the comprehensive development and vetting of these promising new projects. But by the way, in the second half of September, we are also going to Italy for, I don't even know if it can be called a conference, more of a crypto event, where we will specifically introduce the Mosaic Ecosystem to newer and smaller crypto projects, and through that, the Launchpad as well. So the Launchpad is, with what I'm saying, it's going to play an important role. The goal, and it's in everyone's interest, is for as many players as possible to come into the ecosystem onto the blockchain. And for this, the Launchpad is one of the ways to help, so the Launchpad needs to work well. Rather here now, The questions surrounding the launch are the ones where a few things still need to be decided and set in motion. The Launchpad is definitely gonna continuously produce projects. I honestly don't think there's any question about that at all. It's really more about the specific types of projects we choose to steer toward the Launchpad. Let's say, looking back at the first phase, we need to carefully consider in what direction we should be investing our energy to ensure we are bringing in the right kind of projects that will truly succeed. At the beginning, it's fair to say that it hasn't been decided yet which direction the most energy should go. I don't see any really big extra names among the projects starting on the Launchpad right now, but there are enough smaller projects that are waiting for the Launchpad to start. So I think we're in good shape for the launch, but it would be ideal if, after that, not just 2 or 3, but many more projects would come along. And right now, we're just feeling things out to see what the smartest first step is. South absolute questions. Anyway, it's I really like it because it means there are people who are thinking and paying attention. We got a question about whether we're prepared for the period without revenue. And I expected that no one would even think of that. Yes, it was absolutely in the plan. So this has been for a very long time, and that's how we're preparing. However, obviously, since we prepared and planned for it, this is a manageable situation. But what is very important, and there's no secret in this, it's very important where we put our D-Lab energies now, and where we focus, because obviously everything has to work. But what is most important is that it gets started, that the Mosaic Trust Network actually gets started, and the Timothy chat gets started. That is the most important thing. Now, obviously, this can't be done at the cost of not dealing with anything else at all, but this needs to be handled very responsibly. So that is really our main focus right now. And the main focus is to make the existing projects successful. So, we need to move in. We need to populate the Mosaic chain. Every kind of player and project that belongs there needs to come there. And really, when you look at the big picture, apart from the Mosaic Trust Network and the Timothy Chat Project, we honestly shouldn't be spending any serious time or energy on anything else right now. We really need to stay focused on those 2 priorities exclusively. Obviously, this includes helping with new projects that we aren't developing ourselves, but that others want to run on the chain. So I think that is really all there is to say regarding this particular topic. Honestly, I am not entirely sure how the specific importance of two-factor authentication even ended up in the D-Lab questions in the first place, but we will just go ahead and skip over that for now. Right, the renewed communication. The Discord will be opening soon. And, well, the ambassador question will come up here as well. We actually have 2 new ambassadors on board now, although I don't think we've made it public yet exactly who they are, but maybe you already know. Right, well, I won't say it now, because it might be a different event when we officially introduce them to everyone. It's really exciting, and I'm sure you'll be hearing more about it very soon. But actually, one of the ambassadors is working on the new Discord interface. This will be the central communication hub. Of course, different topics will go in other directions too, but the communication will be organized here. There will be separate rooms, separate plans, broken down by topic, etc., etc. These will be introduced. The ambassador program, well, you could say it has started now. We have 1 international ambassador and 1 domestic ambassador. And what's incredibly great is that both of them are very diligent and take it very seriously, which is a really great feeling and means a lot. And it's good to have 2 such ambassadors, because then, let's say the 3rd and 4th ones who come along will have to keep up with this pace and this attitude. Okay, I'm gonna skip over the events, like which events we're going to. I mentioned earlier, I think, that will be the next one. It's going to be in the second half of September. You are free to go over there. And then there's some written down like this. Well, this isn't D-Lab anymore, it's Mosaic. Starting Monday, you'll be able to write to various projects from the web portal for those who want to write, so you'll be able to select which project you want to target with a given message. Or, Sudi, if you want to talk about this in more detail, then go ahead. Or was what I just said enough?
I think so, 'cause we've really run out of time, so maybe we'll just do it like that. Go ahead.
Okay, I would actually skip these here, because there might be more important things later, right?
I think we should skip the D-Lab ones.
Okay, let's skip it. because honestly, there's still a lot left. So hats off to you for still hanging in there. How should we do this, Sudi? Should you ask the question or should we read it and move on?
The questions that came in, there are a ton of things, like I said at the beginning, that we've actually already answered, whether it's regarding Team Akach or the Trust Network. There are some who wrote an email, and the answer to that email was created by you all, but it was sent. However, there are some things that I think are very important to discuss publicly, because this came from others as well, and I definitely want to read that out. And if you could answer that it was previously mentioned that a partner is expected to generate a monthly transaction volume of up to 100 million. When is this partner expected to go live? After the launch, will this transaction volume be realized immediately, or are you counting on a gradual ramp up?
Yes, there were several questions here about the transaction numbers. We were unable to identify the previous communication regarding the 100 million transactions per month. What I remember is that the partner I'm thinking of right now, and which is likely the one in question, is exactly the partner that has been mentioned many times today, like Columbo's wife. I was talking about several million per month there. And, if they are acquired as a client, that's a reference, a reputation. That would likely make it much easier to bring in 2 or 3 more from the not so many players of similar size. And that could already be 10 million transactions a month. Not only did I remember this, but I actually found this communication. I don't even remember anything in the hundreds of millions. Just because I don't remember something doesn't mean I didn't say it. However, we didn't find it, so it wasn't identified. Then another one came along, but maybe Sudi could be the one for this.
Yes. The other question is that it was also mentioned that a daily transaction volume of 100 million is expected for another partner as well. Do you still consider it realistic that these referenced projects will be live this year? If the schedule is changed, please inform us of its timing. I'd like to echo Attila on this, because one of the reasons it took so long, and we haven't replied to this email for a long time, is that we're producing a massive amount of videos, and I didn't remember anything like this. The guys didn't remember it either, and neither did anyone else. There was a part, we started going through those videos, which you can imagine isn't short, even if you speed it up. So it really is such a massive amount of hours, and we didn't find anything like that. I spoke with a manager and asked for a manager too, who said that they also remember something like that. So help me out. So if you have it, please send it over so we can also know exactly what it might have been about. Because there was something about the mosaic. So from our side, there wasn't any. He says, up until when we are talking, that well, there was no mention of 100 million transactions or a 2026 launch. That has happened before, and I've made such mistakes myself. But it has happened to others among the speakers too, that they said something wrong. I didn't even notice, and then that
I'm capable of that too.
afterwards, it had to be corrected. It's possible that something like that happens, but we didn't say anything like that on purpose, because we would remember it. So generally, the things we usually declare, we really pay attention to what we're...
Yes, but still.
It happened during the drought.
If there was something like that, it would be good to find it, because then something needs to be corrected there.
Someone is writing that there was a case where there were 100 million transactions in 4 months, from September to December. It was about something like between autumn and the end of the year, so almost 100 million. There is communication from around April, May. But you can still see what you're writing. We're looking for it. Each one is different. But so that's why I said at the end that if you know which one it is and you send it over, then we will definitely respond to it accordingly. So we don't want to hide from this. And since we have all our videos and we don't delete anything, that's why we'll naturally look into these as well.
But I think we can find this together and then it can be set straight, because then either or we said it wrong. By the way, I have a tendency to say a different number than what I'm thinking, and that's not intentional. Sometimes I don't even notice it. Others tell me that it's not, it's not 1 million, but only 100,000. So we have to check it. Because then, on one hand, we need to fix that. If we said something like that, that partner was absolutely not in prospect from where 100 million transactions a day are expected. I mean, the 100 million a month thing, I can connect that to what I just said, but I think we should move past this because now everyone understands that we'll look for that place and then we'll check what the context was and then it will become clear. So let's move on. Sudi, how should we do this? Will you read the question and then we'll give the answer, or should we read the question?
I'll read it then. We would like to understand more precisely the relationship between the European Union and the Mosaic Trust Network and in what form the EU supports the application of the network. Can we talk about recommendations, standardization efforts, or potential regulatory obligations? What impact might this have on the expected transaction volume of the network?
Right. It's important to clarify this here, and it might have been misunderstood when we were talking about the European Union. Communication. There were professional consultations with EBSI, that is, with the developers of the European Blockchain Services infrastructure, and we actually presented our technology there, introduced ourselves, and explained what we do. Currently, there is no official cooperation with any organization of the European Union. Professional. While initial acquaintances were formed, they were primarily with the developers themselves. You see, what is truly very important to understand here is that the Mosaic Trust Network, I firmly believe, uniquely complies with all of the relevant European standards, norms, regulations, and requirements for the time being. It really stands out as a comprehensive solution in this space. So the fact that we are compatible with EIDAS and can operate according to EIDAS means that for any client for whom this is important, they can be 100% compliant with EIDAS on the Mosaic Trust Network. Now, I don't want to waste time explaining what EIDAS is. It'll surely be discussed later, so feel free to look it up. So this is a very important thing, but it doesn't it's not a collaboration, but rather the whole thing was simply designed to fit into it. Moreover, you have the unique opportunity to carry out a wide variety of creative solutions and strategic approaches that simply wouldn't necessarily work or be viable in other environments, giving you a distinct advantage in how you handle these specific challenges. That not only is it easy to comply with GDPR requirements, but it simply doesn't store any data that would need to be managed under GDPR. This is the greatest security that exists. We'll talk about this later when we get to the Mosaic Trust Network, because it's such a huge advantage that it can provide authentic and verifiable data without storing personal or sensitive information, so it's not a target for theft. It's not even a risk, because there's nothing there to steal. So, in that sense, it's like a safe that's empty. You can't take anything from it, yet it can still ensure verifiability. We'll talk about these later. The Mosaic Trust Network is capable of supporting various signature types standardized in the European Union, including qualified signatures, and under the new EIDAS 2.0 standard, qualified signatures in the European Union must be accepted by companies and corporations, so not by private individuals. Signature, and by the way, the qualified signature is the highest level. The one, perhaps only the one notarized with a notary seal. Signatures above it, but otherwise that is a very strong point. But otherwise, this is something that will be a basic requirement everywhere in 1, 2, or 3 years, that they should be able to handle something like this. We can already do it now. So there is no cooperation, especially not an official one, with any agency of the European Union, but we simply comply with it. But that is also a big deal.
When is it expected that the validator role will be fully opened up to market participants? Are you planning to allow anyone to join the network as a validator under public and transparent conditions? And if so, under what conditions and according to what schedule?
Yes, the first things are that, here the governance can be handed over. This isn't necessarily related, but it would be much better if this were opened up then. Otherwise, to be more precise, under what conditions and how it should proceed. There are many directions one can take here, and everything has its pros and cons. This will definitely be voted on by the community. If you ask me, I would introduce this when governance is with the validators. Technically, it could be solved before that, but I wouldn't be gathering validators that way yet. Anyway, I think we can be very proud of the number of validators, considering that governance isn't with the validators. But this is also one of those things where if this is important to the validator community, and we see that this is important to many, then it can be swapped. In that case, I would explain in more detail why it's not recommended, but if the validator community votes for it, then the order can be swapped. Otherwise, there are indeed several important matters that need to be carefully weighed, and only then can they be formally voted on by the committee.
Then I'll read the next one. Does the project already have specific strategic or business cooperation agreements in place, based on which the introduction or operational application of the Mosaic solution through business cooperation can be expected? If so, within what expected time frame can we count on the communication of these?
Wow. The retail chains right now. So are we thinking of something like, say, an Aldi? Or so we are talking about B2C business chains here, right?
I don't know. I think it's more about this EU logistics regulation change that is hindering us. Because, what we are talking about and what our large enterprise solutions that are in the testing and integration preparation phase. So, the things you are doing, like solutions related to invoice authentication, DID.
International. Well, actually, it turns out that there was a specific international player present in Hungary that we had the opportunity to speak with at length. I, for one, wouldn't exactly count that potential partner among those where I'd feel that, there's going to be any progress. But you have to believe me when I say this. There are actually some players who are here right now, and they are ready to show you what they can do. The chains are confusing me. Retail chains, this could be a logistics supply chain. That's the kind of thing we're talking about. So things like that are coming too. In fact, there will likely be further progress here, that it will be expanded to a wider scope.
There's one thing that the person asking might have been thinking of here. What we've mentioned many times, that it's not the international one because this is a Hungarian project. The logistics application that'll use the Mosaic trusted network for authentication, that is one such partner and one such business collaboration. Yes, there wasn't
Anything international in the question, just whether there is any specific strategic or business collaboration. And the answer is yes, there is.
Well, it was very hard to remember this question after the first sentence.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, by the way, we are constantly working on things like that. On one hand, one of the answers is that there are such things, and we need as many of these as possible. And by the way, we are also communicating in many directions. Of course, the majority of these communications do not yet provide a basis for us to think that there will necessarily be progress. Based on the law of large numbers, there will be a few among those where things aren't going as they should, but it's going well in enough places for us to be in a good spot right at the start. But otherwise, yes, we are still looking for these and communicating. So the situation will be much better now that we can show how it works.
Well, I think on one hand, Since you've been at it for more than 2 hours, I'm getting less tired, I think. But surely I think we should highlight that there is a project that is already under development, and which this year,
But of course there is. Listen,
or this one.
very cool.
Calm down. I know it's not my job, but the guys. I'm really sorry. I'm just taking the floor because I see that it was pretty intense for us too, not just for you, to listen to the whole thing. And in the meantime, you were sending messages, and I saw and read that there are some who would have liked to get answers to different kinds of questions. But you have to realize, and perhaps this is evident from these more than 2 hours, that the Mosaic ecosystem itself consists of quite a serious, multifaceted set of things. And that's exactly why the guy said they wanted to focus on, and we want to focus on, and sorry for phrasing it this way, that everything we have right now should be completed and start working. So really, it's just about reaching the point now where, as you can see, the OS, the thematic chat, the trusted network, the chain, and its various elements are moving forward step by step. I know it's difficult sometimes, and there are those who are impatient with these things. Or why can't a company be named? We've actually talked about this a lot, by the way, and I have to protect the team. Not because I'm sitting here and this is my job, but because I've experienced this myself. That because we told them afterwards how someone effectively ruined it and how they terminated the contract. And please just understand that this is for all of us. It's for your protection just as much as it is for ours, that these things start to work. It's in everyone's best interest. The whole team is working for this. And believe me, they are looking forward to it just as much as you are. I've said it many times that I'm sitting in on these meetings with so many people. So on a daily basis, I see how the different development areas are coming together and how we can move forward. We never said it would work overnight. And I wouldn't want to make excuses for things that happened, even in the case of Alpha, which set us back quite severely. The legislation, which, thank God, has now been changed by the new government. And this is very good, and that you can start using Alpha again, and you should start using Alpha because the value of Codex will also increase then. Moreover, anyone who has used Alpha knows exactly what serious percentages and results could be achieved on it. And it is certain that as 2.0 is completed this year and is put on the Mosaic blockchain, that will again be a kind of step forward as the trust network, as the first company comes onto it, as we just, reinforced here. But for this, we need to be able to move forward and focus on these things. What I would still like is there is another question, because I know there are still questions, but maybe those, or I don't know. I'll be on the Monday call, so let's continue then, because I simply don't want everyone to burn out. But let's talk about, there is this question regarding the transaction fee model. They would like to get some information about that. And I know that this interests others as well. Whether the transaction fees are adjusted to a predetermined value, for example, fixed in USDT, or if they change proportionally with the fluctuations in the token's price. Because if the fees aren't fixed, what mechanism ensures that the cost of using the network remains predictable and competitive in the long run?
Good. Yes, that's a very valid question and a very important one. Well, what you have to see here is that the congestion, Mosaic can handle a very high number of transactions. And the best example here is that since Ethereum is the blockchain with one of the most projects, if not the most, we can handle about 500 times that. This doesn't mean that there can't be congestion for very short periods, and you could go into a lot of things, but the exchange rate does affect the transactions, and we are still incredibly far from the number of transactions affecting this. Besides, by the time we reach that point, the technology will likely have evolved as well. What can be done in such cases? When the validator community deems it harmful to the ecosystem that participants' transaction fees increase due to the rise in the Mosaic coin price, a decision can be made to change it. I definitely do not recommend that we put some kind of automatic mechanism in there, because when there is more time later, I'll explain why. But the possibility is there if this were to persist for a longer period of time, for example, and we feel it's a problem, then a decision can be made about it, and the transaction fees can be changed.
And one last thing I'd like to ask is, when can we expect the validator role to be fully opened up to market participants? Or did I already ask up?
You did ask that.
Yeah.
Actually,
Same.
it's much more important when the governance can be handed over. Validator training programs are very important because, in reality, it can only be handed over if the validators know how to operate the role. And in closing, I would also say that we are truly very, very grateful. And to those who aren't as patient, we are grateful to them too, because that is also understandable, and the other side can also be very well understood. However, you have to see that it took this long to build up, and obviously we made mistakes in this many times ourselves. It could have been done differently, obviously, in hindsight. I'm a very good Monday morning quarterback, so I'm very good at being smart after the fact. But here it took this long to build the foundation that can now get started. So the ecosystem, the blockchain, and all the developments have now reached the point where we can start filling it with life. And that, the moment this starts, it's already a different kind of situation. And this work never stops. And it is constantly taking shape, constantly evolving. You know, the market, the environment, the circumstances, everything is changing, and it is very important that we are able to react to this flexibly. Probably, since this is a very important aspect, we must always maintain the ability to react flexibly. However, I feel that we have laid the foundations, and now we can confidently approach serious, large companies and projects, and we can proudly show what kind of opportunities and capabilities we have. So, thank you very much.
I would just like to add one more thing in closing, that there are two messages, one of which is, someone is writing about the LP tokens. You don't need to separate that. It's the same as how you don't need to break apart an alpha token based on what that specific token contains. You just need to submit it, right? And the other thing is that someone is writing that I don't know. Allegedly, some PDF file was sent to us. I haven't seen any PDF file. So if you have questions like this in a PDF file, please do me a favor and send it to customer support, not to someone else or through someone else, or even to me at steve@novusprime.com, and then we will answer it, of course. But please send this over, because I personally haven't received anything like that yet, so I won't be able to answer that. And for the things we can answer, we try to do so as soon as possible. So thank you very much. We apologize that this turned into such a marathon, and I promise you that I will try to create a written summary of this that is naturally shorter than this, but contains all the essential points. And then we'll send this out in a newsletter, and we'll also upload it to the web office so that those who weren't here can, of course, watch the video, which we'll also post and make available in English so that our international partners can also watch this webinar today. So thank you all very much. And many people are writing here saying thank you.
We thank you very much too.
Someone isn't saying thanks, but...
Well, yeah, but you don't always have to thank for everything. But we are very grateful because it's just so cool that you were able to stick with it until the end. It really was more than 2 hours. So we wish everyone a great Mosaic and a lovely evening, and there's still a bit of summer left. I, for one, am really looking forward to autumn. So, bye, everyone.
Bye. Have a good rest.
Bye.